of that book here today, John Willis. He is a thought leader within the DevOps community. He's the vice president of DevOps at SJ Technology. He was a former director at Docker, and he is currently writing the DevSecOps handbook. Is that true? All right. So that's coming out next year, I believe. And I would just like to welcome John upstage, and we'll be hearing from him about the divine and felonious nature of security, cybersecurity. All right, do you want?
Yeah, the divine and felonious nature of cybersecurity. My name is John Willis, and the best place to reach me or meet me is through that handle called Botchkaloop. You know, I'm easy to find. I've done a lot of presentations. I'll put this presentation up. I've done a lot of things, and this is just the last 10 years. I've been in the industry almost 40 years now, but a lot of startups. I had like 10 startups. Canonical, Chef was actually the 9th person in it. Chef sold the company to Dell, and then sold the company to Docker. And today I'm working at SJ Technologies and doing work with CIOs, primarily just global transformation stuff. It's really exciting if you want to talk about it later. On the right-hand side, I've done an incredible amount of meta stuff. I was the only American in the first DevOps Day, and worked on the handbook. Couple of things. I've authored 10 books. The one I wanted to point out, this is really geeky. Gene wrote the Phoenix Project, and it's if you like the idea of understanding all the other disciplines that make up this thing we call DevOps, then this is it's an audio-only project called Beyond the Phoenix Project. It's really geeky. Peter Senge, Safety, Decker, like some incredible people that really aren't in IT that we cover, that we believe, including Lean. We cover Lean pretty heavily. So, and I always like to say just one Audible credit. So, as was pointed out, we're working on the DevSecOps handbook. Should be out sometime next year. So let's just have a little bit of fun before we get started. I was actually doing a keynote at an Alibaba cloud conference. If you think AWS re:Invent is crowded, go to an Alibaba cloud conference in China. Anyway, I was doing this ridiculously stupid pose, and the Sensu guys, so they were pretty smart because now I mention their company every time I do this. They decided to meet me. And now they got this thing going. Whenever they catch me in a weird pose, they start it all over again. And then there's me with Muhammad Ali. So in case you're going, there you go. So the felonious nature of cybersecurity, all right? So I said the divine and felonious. So we'll start off with the felonious nature. Mark Andreessen, if you don't know who he is, he made 30 cents on a dollar on what? That was like $6 billion. GitHub, he was the early investor in GitHub, but he was actually the inventor of Netscape. But he did this probably about 10 years ago. He said that software is eating the world, and he's right? I mean, you look at the things we can do with cloud and tools, right, and the abstractions and the open source and the things that we're capable of doing today. It's because it's the shoulder of giants of just tremendous amount of contributed software. So, and that's great, right? The paradox is that also it is infecting. The idea that, you know, like you take something like Google TensorFlow, which is deep learning. You know, 10 years ago, there were probably only 3 or 4 places on the planet where you could have used that type of technology. You know, my son is not a brilliant kid. He's reasonably smart. He's working on a project with TensorFlow right now, right? And that's not because he's a brilliant kid. It's because the abstractions have gone insane, right? The things that we can do today. But again, I'm going to show you, if you don't already know, how dangerous this is. And it's a paradox. There is no chance of turning back, right? So like we are on this path. We can't, you know, cloud, Google, Amazon, all built on the shoulder giants. So the paradox is we actually have to realize the danger zone we're in. Sonatype, who's out there, this is their 3rd year of this report. If this presentation interests you, I recommend getting all 3 of the reports. Actually, the last 2 are really good. The first one was okay. They own Maven Central, right? So they see almost 85% of all the Java traffic. This is the last year report. 87 billion downloads in 2017. 87 billion modules were downloaded. All right? This is just a quick print of some of the major breaches here. right? We all probably heard of the Equifax breach. I'll talk about that in a little bit. $4 billion. Here's the thing, even the Target breach, right? Like the Target breach, this is 162 million. The year that they had that breach was one of their significant years where they were going to go after the e-commerce, going after Amazon. So I think the numbers still are not really, can't even really tell how much they really lost because of the trust. This is just a calculated kind of cost. The other thing, too, is IBM does a report, as everybody does a report, but it's a pretty good security report, 18. So the average breach is about 8 million, but the real cost is it's about for a million records is about 40 million. So it's probably millions of records, right? So you can see there a 50 million record breach could be $350 million. I did this presentation at the JFrog, their Swamp Up, and going in. I did that in May. And I did some counts of what was going on the week prior to there. 1.5 million Java modules downloaded the week prior to that event. But look at that one, Node. 5 million Node modules being downloaded in 1 week. And we could spend a whole day on the complexities and the dangers of Node, of what's going on there. Go look up the backspace problem if you haven't heard about it. The other one that's interesting there, this is actually from the Sonatype data, 10% of everything in basically Maven Central is vulnerable. So do the math, 87 billion downloads per year, and 10% of that across the board is absolutely known vulnerabilities. Any of you geek shell people out there can tell me how ridiculous this one is and how scary it should be? Let me quickly see the fix. The dash R. This is with every Red Hat DNS client. And so one of the Equifax breach, and some of the other ones we're talking about, is what's called RCEs, remote command execution, where they get an escape, and if you're on an authorized machine, they got access to your machine. And once they're in, forget about it, they're in. This is literally on a wild read, $opt, right? There was the shell code, literally you could escape in and run your own shell script. Dynaroot, they called it. This is where the cloud bees get mad, but this was actually coming in an event. I did Shodan, no Shodan, right? You can just basically give a port or a well-known port or product. And this was basically going into that conference, almost 270,000 unlocked down Jenkins servers. All right? I mean, a lot of them are like from some crazy countries, but the point is the NSA breach basically was a kill chain. We'll talk a little about a kill chain through a default Jenkins install. Now, Cobbies will yell at me after this and say, John, the default now is locked down. And yes, that's true. But there's a lot of older versions out there that are just sitting around. I always say, friends don't let friends install default Jenkins. I was thinking of taking this out, but the 2018 Verizon report still points to this report. So in 2015, 97% of all the exploits were down to 10 CVEs. That's the National Institute of Standard Technology's list of known common vulnerabilities and exploits. But here's the kicker. At that time, 8 of them were 10 years old, right? They don't say that in the report, right? That's the thing. Like, we can go worry about, like, the cyber scientists from Cambridge versus MIT and the mathematical, or we can, like, just clean up some dirty stuff, right? I mean, like, that Dynaroot, right? That's an escape character. This is actually in the 2018 DBI report. This is pretty scary, right? So let me walk through it really quickly. Basically, what this is saying is that from known vulnerability to compromise, 87% of the bad people get in within minutes. After the compromise, only 3% of the people who are compromised know they're compromised in minutes. And 68% know about it months after they've been compromised. So Kubernetes is fine, right? No problems there. I love Kubernetes. Like, again, it's a paradox. I'm not knocking open source. I love Docker, I love containers, and I love Kubernetes. But like, here's some just quick, you can look them up. This is a credentials hack on Kubernetes, or Kubelet. It was a dashboard hack. They hit Tesla and Weight Watchers. And I could make a joke there, but hey, we'll hold off. And this is etcd, right? This is basically the default distributed store you get with Kubernetes. I forgot my glasses. It's somewhere around 2,500 unlocked, non-TLS etcds. So I want to tell you a tale of two breaches, right? The one everybody should know. How many people have heard about the Equifax breach? Okay, good. I was going to kick you out of the room. No. So I'll go the short version, but basically it was an RCE. Basically it was if you put in a pound command equals in a script, and you have to be on an authorized machine, you basically could run that script authorized, and all you had to do is embed that in HTML tag. This was as high as you get. It was a critical. The CVEs are scored from 0 to 10, or 1 to 10. This was a 10. This was Homeland Security was calling companies. This was such a dangerous vulnerability. Basically, that's a script to get the hack. It was discovered on 3.6. It was announced on 3.9. There was a CVE created on 2017. And again, I don't know what was going on in Equifax, and I'm not going to play we call these counterfactuals, where I'm not going to say, well, I know better, and I'm smarter than them. For whatever reason, it took them from announced to discover, that was 4 months. 6 months till they actually addressed it, right? So I don't know what's going on there. In fact, what's interesting, I took it out to save time, but actually, even if they would have addressed it, the quarterly Oracle patch in April would have put it back in. Again, I'm not blaming Oracle either. We all suck. Don't look for anybody to blame here. We stink. This is my Felonious argument. Except for Citra Longo. If you want to look at basically RSA, we ran a DevOps track earlier this year. She presented at Fannie Mae how she reacted. So she got the memo on 3.9. She put a war room together. The executives, even the CEO was in the room. And basically the first thing she said to the team was, that website where we say we're like the partner or we're the people who put people in houses, we'd be full of shit if we don't take down the production loan system right now. And they did it. The executive team took her word. Now she has an awesome CISO. They took down the production loan system. And here's the key. Equifax took them a couple of months, saw some anomalies, and went out and tried to hire some brainiac MIT mathematic geniuses to come in to figure out what's going on. And I wish they would have called me, because I would have saved them a ton of money to just look at the CVEs or run a scan, I don't know. But she didn't call anybody. They stayed there in the war room, and she ran that curl script basically with a cat etsy password against every URL, internal, external, in the whole company. Here's the meta point. She didn't go call IBM. She didn't call FireEye. She didn't wait till the next day to find some genius consultant. She didn't care whether you thought it was an ugly or exotic example of how to fix it. She fixed it. And within 24 hours, they turned the production loan application back on, because anyone that got punched through where they actually read Etsy password was the candidate for, it was Struts 2, it was a module called Jakarta, and they were able to patch that. So you would think after Equifax, we would all be on the, hey, we got it, thanks for, CNN, Wall Street Journal. Again, Sonatype, 80,000 vulnerable Struts downloads per month, 12 months after the Equifax. If you want to argue with me that I have no business calling this the felonious nature, have at it. The hits keep on rolling. Again, I'm not blaming. I have really dear friends over at Pivotal, but they had a similar vulnerability in spring. Now we're talking big game hunting. It was an RCE in spring, basically published in September 17, wasn't discovered by Pivotal until February, right? Just about 3 months ago, another critical CVE. The thing is that here's kind of the, there was this notion what they call the Goldilocks zone. It actually was kind of coined by NASA of a planet that could be just like ours, right? Where, and taken from the three bears or whatever, not too cold, not too hot, somewhere in the middle, right? And there's always been this discussion about security, about where's the Goldilocks zone for security. Well, feloniously, it has been on the perimeter. And Martin Casado, the inventor of SDN, Nicira, sold it to VMware, NSX, he, about 5 years ago, would say that it was actually in the hypervisor. I'm okay with that. And he would say that we spend 80 to 90% of our spend on perimeter-based security. How much you spend on security? Well, I spend like 20 million a year. Oh, I got you beat. I spend 30 million a year. So I got all these exotic boxes around the perimeter. Well, the truth is, the hackers, the adversaries, they don't even know what FireEye is. They don't care about the perimeter. You know what they do? They sneak in your building. They tailgate. And guess what your weakest point then is? It's that Jenkins server, or it's that etcd and Kubernetes that was left up over the weekend. It drives me nuts when people say to me, I ask people about their policy. I say, what's your policy for criticals and highs? And I'll know right off the bat whether they're like off the chart and we got a lot of work to do, or we're at least in the sane, speeding lane. If they say, well, we got 60 days for criticals and highs, and I say, what do you do for exception? That gives me more insight about how you just exception forever. When does it actually go to a broken business process? But the thing that always gets me, even on the mature ones, I'll ask that question of, do you have a different policy for production versus test? And they're like, yeah, of course. I'm like, why? Well, because the test systems don't face that perimeter thing you talked about, right? In fact, you should have a stricter policy on your test systems, because that's where the bad people are going first. They're looking for your weakest system, the system that somebody threw up over the weekend and got sick on Monday and figured they'll delete it on Wednesday when they get back to work. Because once they're in, they're geniuses. So the notion of perimeter-based, right, again, we've got to, I'm not saying, if I have time, I've got some bonus material on what's called moving target defense stuff that they're doing at Aetna. But so you can use both worlds. Like have an IDS notify a container-based system that actually rebuilds everything. I just gave away I buried the lead, but so they can both work together. But if you're stuck in this mindset that you're protecting the perimeter and there's some vendor that if you got a critical on Wednesday night, we'll call our vendor tomorrow and find out what we should do. Unlike what Citra Longo did at Fannie Mae. And she owned it. She didn't wait till the next day to call some vendor to try to figure out what to do. And I've had people say, oh, she just ran a curl script. Yeah, she just ran a curl script. Werner Vogels, the CTO of Amazon, said a while back, he was being interviewed for an ACM. He said that at Amazon, we do this different. We say, you build it, you run it. Right? This became a mantra for DevOps. As early days of DevOps, we talked about, developers wearing pagers, right? Like this notion today, we call it build-run teams. Some really good literature coming out of IT Revolution on managing build-run teams and all that. Right, so that became kind of battle cry. This is actually, it blows my mind, this is actually 2006 at an Agile conference. Jez Humble, Dan North, and Chris Reed. 2006. I see people taking pictures of this now. This is Wikipedia from 2006. They were pretty smart dudes. All ThoughtWorks. Right? We notionally know this, right? It's the kind of throw in the gates, developer or services, people build something, green, green, red, go back, green, 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 red, go back, right? And over time, we create that resilience, right? It's a kind of a supply chain pipeline concept, right? So that's been our kind of DevOps thing. And if you look at, this is what I put in my joke, honey, if you see this, I'm sorry. Platonically, I would love to marry this woman. She basically is she runs pretty much all engineering at Google. She's incredible. Like McFesson, She actually, 2 years ago at Swamp, I put this presentation out there, and I'm sure it's almost double now. These are some of the numbers Google runs, but that's the one, 150 million automated tests. Like, I don't call Google for support, right? Like, I don't think I've ever had to, right? Like, this is how you create resilience. This is what DevOps has been all about, is building that resilience in, a lot of culture. You can't just do this without the culture. You know, there's a gazillion presentations about culture and behavior and automation and tools and all that stuff. But when you, this is the, you know, when you get to there, you're Google. But, so in summary, I'm doing a quick swipe of DevOps before I talk about DevSecOps. And so if you look at the history of what happened over the last 10, 15 years, we had the Agile Manifesto. Developers started changing the way they thought about delivering software. What happened was they forgot to give the memo to us ops folks. That's okay, we caught up, you know, and so we kind of, if you think about Agile, it took, you know, from months and days to say deliver the software, but the last mile was how do we get it into production? As DevOps folks, you know, we came in and said, let's make this one party, Dev and Ops. We got the deploy thing, and here we sit in 2018, and security's broke. Like, holy dog, why did we forget security people? Why didn't we do that? Right, so this leads to this thing that started this discussion called DevSecOps. And here's where I say, if you want to argue about the name, go meet on that corner, because I'll be over in this corner working on the solutions. I didn't create the name's working. Get over it. Like, get over it. Because people are coming, security people are showing up to DevOps conferences, and that didn't used to happen. So notionally, how about this idea that you build it, you run it, you build it, you secure it? So we put, you start thinking about like, okay, if Werner Wargels was right, a lot of people have gone down this path. Some people call it build run. Build run might mean to have multiple teams per service. I have it have dev, arc, a network, testing all on one build run team, another build run team. So now we have security there. And security puts the meta and all that stuff, and like, what do? We just put an abstraction layer for security gates. In fact, as we're writing in DevSecOps, I would like kind of joke every once in a while, like, this is kind of easy. We just tell everybody what we told them to do with QA and ops. Right, so those gates now become additional abstractions like behavior-driven development, tools for test-driven development, of course, scanning. I'll talk about like a final kind of tips at the end. And so if we look at what we've done reasonably well, and these are not really recommendations, they're the quickest, easiest icons I could find, because I'm lazy. But you think notionally of how we think about the supply chain. We put them in these mental blocks. Pick your poison in terms of how you want to describe the blocks, but it's some sort of flow that goes from kind of delivery to version control, build to test to release, right? And so notionally, what DevOps pretty much signifies is that we fill in all the blanks, right? In fact, I used to have a slide where I'd have some of those missing, and somebody come in, John, come to my site, you want to see what we're doing? And then say, well, we don't do any CI, CD, or source control. It's just a pain in the ass. But man, we use Selenium, and we do some really crazy stuff with our IDE. It'd be like, you guys are like, got it wrong. You know, and like, how do I explain this to you? You're doing it wrong. But that's what we do today with security. Most people, you know, because there's this notion of shift left. We take this from the kind of manufacturing. You know, we try to take defects downstream and capture them early on in the stream. They're far less expensive if we can move them as far left as we can. But today, we don't really have all the buckets filled in. And so that notion of a shift left or a systems approach to how we solve this that we've done reasonably well from a DevOps community, we're sitting here saying, well, I got this DevSecOps, I know what it means. Yeah, we use call sys. Yeah, we're okay. Yeah, okay, that's good, but like, what else? Because remember those earlier slides where I tell you like how dangerous this stuff is? That's just not enough. So like you got to fill in all the blanks, and I don't care what you use. There's tons of open source. There's great products. And every one of those like buckets should have something, including configuration management. I can spend another 20 minutes about the dangers of going to cloud where the artifacts are still dangerous, but probably the most dangerous things now are like VPC definitions, security groups, Terraform configuration definitions, because how do we get them? First off, we don't source control them. We don't treat them like artifacts. Most people don't. Secondly, how do we get them? We go out to Stack Overflow or something. We find one that works. We paste it in and it works. In fact, there's this interesting heritage of like, Joe's working on a dev system on his laptop. He finds an example, cuts and pastes, and it works. 3 weeks later, somebody says, does anybody there know how this works? And they're like, Joe's got one. But this Sue is working in like QA. So she takes that copy, and then you can see where somewhere along the line he's going to move it to production, right? And this like stuff that worked and a whole bunch of stuff that nobody knows what it does is actually an adversary's dream. So we spent a lot of time about the dangers of configuration and how to treat configuration artifacts through the pipeline. Some tools are powerful. There's some to the left that still don't really recognize the problem. But things like Twistlock or Akamai or Arkai, I can never pronounce the name of it, Dome 9, there's a ton of them. So in general, the Goldilocks zone, so I kind of left that hanging for a minute, is the supply chain. You can argue about whether it's the hypervisor, great. If you want to put security in a hypervisor, VMware with NXX and SDN, God bless you. But if 82 billion Java modules are getting downloaded per year and 10% of them are vulnerable, a fact, and we're not even talking about Node, where like the developer of one module decided to take out a blank and like a third of the internet went down. I'm not kidding. Our best defense is to get the supply chain right. It doesn't fix everything. There's still a lot of stuff out there. But that's got to be the place where we think about the Goldilocks zone, and it's our ground zero for fighting this war. We have a chapter in the DevOps handbook. Like I said, it's a little bit outdated. Here's in my travels, I've been really looking at this problem hard for almost 2 years now. So these are my tips. So if you have one takeaway, or two takeaways, this slide and the notion of the supply chain being the Goldilocks zone for security. What does that mean? I need to get my risk and those people to join this party. I need to stop throwing the code over the wall. I need to get them to come in and help. Be part of my build run teams or whatever it takes to get them to help me fortify the delivery of a service. But this is my kind of overall, you got to work with your auditors. I'm going to spend a lot of time next year. If I have time, I'll show you some stuff that I need help with. I'm going to start a large project next year, and I need help. Because I've been visiting a lot of companies over the last year, and boy, I tell you, the disconnect between the edge and what the auditors think is happening at some of the biggest like mutual funds, financials, banks is so disconnected, it is scary. Right? So you have to get the auditors to shift left. You got to get them in to help you, ask them to help you build the supply chain that works for them. At the very least, you can cut 35 days a year down to like a day when you do audits. Ruthlessly, I'm going to have to say it 3 times, ruthlessly eliminate false positives when you're scanning. The worst thing you can do is buy the most expensive scanner, throw it out there, and just like the perimeter thinking you're safe. Because if you start throwing a ton of false positives to developers or service owners, they're going to start ignoring you, thinking everything that you send them is a waste. In fact, some create their own kind of email bucket to automatically delete them or throw in a bucket, right? You have to basically use as many scanners as you can. Because I'm sorry, God bless my good friends at the companies that have them, they all stink. And it's not their fault because it's an incredibly hard problem. The dependency mapping on some of these problems, in fact, if you look at that Equifax one, if you actually get the chance to deep dive on where it goes, it starts with the Struts2 library, goes down to something called Jakarta, and then you start seeing all these libraries. And there's some ThoughtWorks libraries in there, and I don't remember if the ThoughtWorks is where the actual vulnerability is, But the point is, the Apache developers have the same constraint. The Apache Software Foundation developers have the same constraint your developers have. We can't rewrite everything. The reason why Struts 2 is so vulnerable, but it's so well used, is if you hired a new developer and you gave them the first week, and thought, oh my, this is a great developer, I can't wait to see what they do. You give them a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, give her, and then you come in and say, what are you doing? Oh, I'm it's parsing right to you, and it's awesome. Like, you're writing it from scratch? Why are you doing that? There's tons of libraries out there. So we actually promote this behavior. And the Apache Foundation people are in that same turtles all the way down problem. So it's a hard problem. Really think about the actionability, even if that's a word, of the things that you send developers from your scanners. Because again, it's an anti-pattern if you just start giving them noise. Explain the vulnerabilities in business impact terms. Another problem that you could do is send them the CV number and then point them out to OWASP. And I'll tell you what, if you're an OWASP web developer, God bless you, but it's the worst website I've ever seen since like the 60s. And developers are like, okay, I give, what's the password? There's no password. Oh, okay. Just take some time. There's one of my co-authors, DevSecOps Handbook, she basically, you got to be Shannon Leitz, who's like this amazing, incredible person. You got to be able to have a company that lets you have a 50-person red team dedicated to attacking your own company. Right, those are 2 obstacles you have to have. But you have that. She doesn't actually break the build. She simulates the breach. So if you put in a vulnerability in there, she hits the thing within some of them are automated. And just says, oh, by the way, we've just breached 150 million records. We'll probably be out of business this afternoon if you don't recall this in 5 minutes. In 8 minutes, we're going to recall it. And by the way, that email goes all the way up the chain. You want to change behavior? Show somebody that something they did basically will put the company out of business. Oh, by the way, this is the Equifax breach. Could be 4 billion. Think you might want to check it. Or you can send them a vulnerability telling that, a ton of vulnerabilities every minute telling that they've got an SQL injection, and they'll say, I don't even make any SQL calls in my code. I've actually had that, true story. DevOps the vulnerability, but just make it like a bug is a bug is a bug. A defect, a bug, right? Don't put your vulnerabilities in this ticketing system and your software in here. Just put, if you're migrating to a build run type organization, cue those to the service owner. They come in, and that service owner team now takes the responsibility, and you don't get to tell them what's the most important thing. You educate them, like maybe it's a bug that basically reverse calculates interest, or it's a critical 10 that basically has an RC injection. They'll get to decide which one to work on first. You can't tell them that your critical 10 is more important than a bank where there's an error in interest calculation, right? But they have to own that. You have to educate them, but just throw it in the backlog. Don't make it different. Don't make it a disconnect. The other thing I don't really understand is, I don't know why companies would have closed code bases. I mean, there are certain scenarios where there are some real proprietary stuff like high-frequency trading and stuff like that. I get that. But in general, the idea that we just have some web transaction system and only this group can see it, I mean, you're just doing a disservice. Just let everybody see it. If I'm bored, I might go check your code out and see what's going on. And then just educate the vulnerability. I told you that, actually I'm going to have a lot of time. I'll be able to do some bonus slides. Thank you, 45 minutes. I love you guys. 30 minutes sucks. I'm thinking a lot about this. The Topo Palo of Capital One, he was the first fellow over there. If you haven't paid attention, Capital One is pretty much bleeding edge right now in fintech. Thousands and thousands of developers. They've been doing all sorts of crazy stuff. And Topo's pretty much one of the guys steering the ship. And there's a lot of discussion. A couple of banks are talking about this idea of some audit trail of the supply chain. Right? So it's like crypto events that actually go ahead and tell me So at Capital One, if you look at what some of the things they do, I think they have what they call the 29 control points. So in order to basically kind of get managed, like in a DevOps sense, as a development team, you have to prove that you have these 29 control points. It used to be like 18, now I think it's 29, right? And there are all sorts of things, like, obvious things like it has to be source controlled, was there a peer, was a pairing on the pull request, all these things, right? And now what he's trying to do is create attestation in the form of, I hate to use the word blockchain because I think that's like a hammer to kill a fly, but it is some sort of kind of chain of attestation of the control points. I think this is going to be the next big thing. I know 3 banks, good, I got a thumbs up, let's talk later. I got 3 banks that are all in on this. I just really think this is, because this is where we start connecting the audit to the edge. Because there's a whole idea that I talk about, it's called compliance theater, it's security theater. People have felt like they're doing a whole bunch of crap with the CAB, and I'm not anti-ITIL, but if the people doing things feel like they got to do all these games and know that they're just games because they gamify it themselves, then and they know that the auditors, like, really what they see has nothing to do with what they're doing, then it's just broken. It's theater, right? So this idea of supply chain, and so I literally was in China and I was thinking about this, and I was thinking, like, what if I added a quick slide? This is dirty, but I tried to say, if there was the beginning of an auditor manifesto, right? Inclusion over exclusion. I can't tell you how many times, and just smile if you've heard this in your company. Just give me a little, because then you don't have to raise your hand or anything. I hear, we don't tell auditors things they don't already know. A couple of nods, yeah, I got a smile. Yeah. Big companies, big banks, big mutual funds. My heart drops. You gotta be kidding me. I had one tell me, oh no, we don't want them to know what Kubernetes is yet. That's broken. That's fundamentally broken. Inclusion versus exclusion. Transparency over need to know. Ownership of the business over delegation. There's how many times there's these checkoffs, right? Great classic. Developers, when they're doing things, they do a risk assessment checkoff. Like, they know nothing about the risk. There's nobody trained or anything, and it's their responsibility to check. And what do? They check it. Unless they got Shannon Leach tell them, hey, by the way, you got 5 minutes to get rid of this because I just compromised 150 million system record database records. And then, you got to break down the silos. All right, so I will actually have some time for bonus, but so I told you this presentation was called The Divine and Felonious Nature of Cybersecurity, right? Like, I like to have fun with titles, but I do like to actually glue it back together. I feel pretty confident that I've proven my case that there's a felonious nature of cybersecurity right now. And I'm not even a cyber person. I've given this presentation like 15 times now, and I've not had one, white hat or cyber, and I did validate it with some of my, like, top tier, like, incredibly smart white hat people, contest that I'm wrong. I'm not wrong. We are felonious in what we're doing. The paradox. So, but here's the thing. I was at a Chicago cyber conference, and I was the closing keynote, and they had an anonymous hacker as the morning keynote. And they had him, like, his face blurred out, his voice changed, and he was in some hidden room. And he talked about, like, his last 5 breaches, right? So he goes out dark web. He basically finds a contract for your company, very specific. I want this. If you can get me these 150 million records, this is what we'll pay. He goes to the site. He does some reconnaissance, gets there early, finds out how you dress. Do you wear sneakers, dress, all that. Finds out if you have a front entrance or a back entrance. There's a big bank in Ohio. I did some consulting years ago, and there's a front entrance that has guards and everything. And then if you're some lowly consultant, you have to park like 80,000 miles in the tundra. And guess what way you go in the building every morning? You wait for somebody that goes in that back door, and you tailgate, right? So, I've been in large airlines where literally the gates have the concrete pylons, but if you go to the museum in the back, you can come in the back door without going through any security. I was just at a bank in China, And now I just like, I casually, especially when I have to go in, when the entrance is so secure, it's ridiculous. You know, and this like large bank in China, there was like this little fence in the back with the pond area. You know, so they get in your building, trust me. They're geniuses at social engineering. So he said that out of the 5 less paid compromise that he did, 4 of them he tailgated. Just waited for some, and had all these strategies, you know, if he was a little worried, act like he was having a fight with his wife on the phone, you know, say, oh, get away, you know, I don't want to do this. And I thought, you know, and he was almost kind of making fun of us, you know, people that have been in this business for years. And what he didn't realize is that, you know, you try to do the right thing, but then, like, you're working in a company, and, you know, Ken's, you know, I know him, but he's like, you know, 8 cubes that way, he's 4 paces behind me, I let the door close, he yells at me, you know, you jerk, you know who I am. And over time, there's this notion what they call the normalization of deviance. Like, we just get in a mode where he's just normalized this deviant behavior, so you know, I'm tired of getting yelled at, I'm just going to let him in. And like, this young kid never experienced that. And I thought, okay, here's a scenario. We talk about culture in DevOps. What if it's like raining? This is like a totally exaggerated story, right? It's raining, Susie has 10 boxes, it's cold, she's pregnant, I don't know what else could make the story so horrible. She's 3 paces behind you, and you let the door close. And then you wait to help, and you stand there waiting to get yelled at. And the first thing that she does, she comes up to you and says, I want to thank you for making our company more secure. Or imagine you're in the hallway, and you see somebody you kind of know, and you say, I hate to do this, but you don't have your badge on right now. And instead of saying, you know, you're a jerk, you know I work here, having that person say, you know what, I want to thank you. You know, I thank TSA agents all the time. I mean, they make my life horrible. I travel 200,000 miles a year. Like, if there's anybody who should hate these people, it's me. But I thank them every time, right, for the same reason, right? So it's kind of that, you know, that's the divine. All right, so what to choose in 4 minutes with all the cool stuff. I'll make these available. I do have a video of some of this. You know, when I had an hour presentation, I went into some of the stuff about what you can do with containers. One of the things I found most interesting is, you know, there's a lot of cool things you can do with containers. But Jessie Frazel had this contest early this year. She's just Mrs. Container, if you will. She works at Microsoft now, but she used to be one of the lead developers at Docker. She did a capture the flag, and all she ran was default Docker with the default SE-comp template, and challenged the whole community to capture flag. From what I've heard, not being able to catch it. A lot of cool stuff out there that you can do. One other thing really important is you can do all that stuff, but then by default, if you don't configure Kubernetes, it all gets turned off. So there's a lot of little gotchas. There's also a lot of gotchas on Kubernetes. The only thing I would say is TLS everything, like everything. I showed you the etcd stuff earlier, right? But there are some cool tools out there. This is from Aetna, DJ Schleen. He's got another great presentation. He's got tons of presentations, but RSA, DevSecOps Day, RSA early this year in San Francisco. He calls it moving target defense. Now, he's all containerized. He runs production applications, Kubernetes containers. And so he'll do things like he'll constantly just roll containers. So if one of these adversaries spends all this time trying to get in, they sneak in your building, do all this stuff, and they find some place, an hour later, they disappear and have to do it all over again. How about that? Right? And that's the normal state. It's just rolling. You know, again, you have to be running containers. You got to have a very, you know, kind of not completely stateless application, but sort of. But what he does is, like, he throws the thresholds up when he thinks he's under attack. So he connects that with his IDS, and he may recycle the whole cluster. He may actually redeploy the whole application. Why? Because he can, right? This is some of Shannon Leet's work. This will be, actually, all these stories are going to be in DevOps Handbook, but she does a lot of research on adversaries. So again, you have to have a lot of competence and bandwidth, and the corporation has to give you the amount of time to do this kind of research, or even have to do the research. But she understands like all the things about her adversaries, and does some really in-depth study on, and will be in the DevSecOps handbook, on adversaries. And so now she's at the point where she actually can identify who the adversaries are. This is like a metametrics, right? So the metametrics is like, I don't care what anything else is going on. If this is improving, I know I'm doing good. So she tracks adversary retention rate or return rate. She knows who they are, and if they're coming back, sticking around for a couple of minutes and leaving, because it's all economics for these people. They're going to another place where it isn't going to cost them a whole lot of time. Like that moving target defense, if they go through 2 iterations of that and get crushed every hour, hell with those guys. I'll go on to find some other idiot that's still running struts 2 in a static Amazon EC2 instance, Tomcat container that still has the vulnerability. See if I can break in somebody like Equifax. Sorry if somebody from Equifax is here. All right, I've been doing this kill chain workshop. It's been really cool. We did it at DevOps Enterprise Summit. We have developers actually deploy the struts 2. We give them Metasploit, Skipfish, and Nmap, and we let them do the exploit. Then we show them how to fix it. It's pretty cool. Hey, with 38 seconds, I have done. Somebody was.